and welcome to the January 2025 OSBA Forum. I'm Kathy McFarland.
And I'm Mark Bobo.
And we are so excited to connect with educational leaders from throughout Ohio to bring these conversations to our members.
And today, Kathy, we're pleased to have Mr. Richard Laine with us. He serves as the Midwest Region Director of the National Center of Education and Economy. Richard, welcome to the OSBA Forum.
Kathy, Mark, thank you very much for the introduction and for the opportunity to engage in the discussion.
Of course. So let's just start off with an easy one. Richard, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experiences in education?
Sure. I've been in education probably 30 plus years in working in systems and in roles that have given me the opportunity to have large impact across states and districts around the country. Was associate superintendent in the State Board of Education in Illinois to being the director of education for the Illinois Business Roundtable. Moved to New York and led the Wallace Foundation's work around education leadership. And so really launched that initiative that really drove the understanding and the research behind the fact that leadership actually does matter in education. And then moved down to DC and worked as the director of education for the National Governors Association. Worked with governors and state leaders around the country, really helping them make the connection between education and the workforce and really bring in some of the social service supports that kids need to thrive in school. And then now just joined the National Center for Education and the Economy about 5 months ago as their Midwest director, and really culminating a lot of the work in my career around connecting education and the economy and really supporting all young kids, especially kids that we have not done well by in terms of giving them a pathway into the middle class and success. And I would be remiss if I didn't say in that career, I also spent about 5.5 years as an elected school board member in New Jersey.
So Richard, you have a huge background here. So let me just ask, many of our listeners are not familiar with the National Center for Education and Economy. Tell us a little bit about the center.
Sure. The National Center for Education and the Economy, as we jokingly say, we are a 35-year-old startup. And that's basically because we've been around for over 3 decades doing a lot of the research of the best performing, fastest improving systems, education and workforce development systems around the world. We've documented that in terms of finding the common elements of those systems that support young people, all young people, in terms of thriving. And so for a long time, we really focused on excellent research reports, publications, working with partners to drive some policy work. But the last 5 or 10 years, we've really leaned into developing strengths around education leadership, changing and transforming systems, and really working with more specifically working with states, districts, school boards, and other leaders around how do we transform education in this country to ensure all students have an opportunity to thrive and that we're competitive internationally.
Richard, you are expressing now that the center has been working diligently doing research for years, and you all have produced what is called the NCEE Blueprint, Designing Systems That Work. Give us an overview of the blueprint and its intents and purposes.
Sure, thank you for that question. The blueprint is really a distillation of this 35 years of research of studying the best performing education and workforce development systems in the world. And the idea here is not to replicate what Finland has done or transform or bring Singapore's education to this country. What we did is we studied the best performing systems in the world and found the common elements. So what we did is, in a sense, we took out the cultural issues or the societal issues of various countries because the systems are in countries that are so distinct and so different that we said there were commonalities across, and that's the basis of the blueprint that we have created and captured over the years. And it's really built around 4 interconnected components of a system. The first one is preparing young people for long life learning. It's this recognition that the highest performing systems prepare young people as they enter into education, support their learning around the relevance and the rigor of learning, and then ensure young people are prepared to continue their education and their entry into the workforce. So that preparing young people for long life learning really is focused on how do we build systems, connect systems so that young people can thrive in whatever direction or whatever career path they want to go in. The second piece, and this is what we know, is no learning happens without the adults, the teachers in the building. And so the second piece of our blueprint is around cultivating high capacity, forward thinking educators. So in a sense, it's always looking around corners, asking the question of how do we ensure the education we're giving our students, engaging them, is relevant for the world they're going to enter. So one specific aspect of that we're spending a lot of time around is how are we thinking about how AI can complement what teachers and leaders do in school and help students kind of think about how do they use that to empower their learning, empower their opportunities as they go into the workforce, as compared to, I think, what some educators are doing is being fearful of AI and trying to prevent its entry into education. We would argue you need to be forward thinking. Educators need to know how to take advantage of it. And so that's an opportunity to think about how we cultivate high capacity, forward thinking educators. The third component, Mark, is around joining forces to ensure all learners thrive. In this country that's different than a lot of other countries is we put a lot on our educators, from being education experts to being social service providers to being the providers of food and health services, and you name it. And in other countries where school systems, education, workforce development systems have thrived and have created opportunities for young people, for all young people, there's partnerships. There's a connection between the social service agency and the schools. There's connections between parents and the schools. There's connections between the workforce and schools. So that, in a sense, it's not about just depending on educators to be everything for everyone, but it's really understanding what we need to prepare and support our young people to be able to thrive. And so that notion of joining forces across systems, between the public sector, private sector, between the formal learning and informal learning, is really powerful in what we've learned from other systems. And then the fourth component of that blueprint is really thinking differently about systems leadership. And as I said, in my background is I helped launch the work of the Wallace Foundation 25 years ago around education leadership. And up until that point, and even kind of for the first decade of that work, education leadership was thought of as secondary. And it was not as important as teachers, and oftentimes no one wanted to spend money on it. And what we know now from other systems and what we know both in education and out is that leadership matters. Leadership is what empowers and creates the conditions for teachers to excel. And it's the component of empowering systems to work for all kids. So this blueprint is really around focusing on, making sure kids have the opportunity to thrive, that we have the adults in the system, that we're connecting systems, and that we have the leadership to drive the change and the transformation that we all know we need. So it's not an easy lift, but it's the lessons we've learned from the highest performing systems around the world.
There's a lot there to unpack. That
Yes.
was great. I mean, everything from the AI and how you measure success. So I'm going to ask that question because we have a lot of conversation about how do you actually measure success when it comes to students, educators, and the broader community. All of the things that you just talked about sound really great, but how do you know they're working? And how do you measure and say, yep, that was successful?
So there's two pieces, I think, in that one, Kathy. One is kind of what's the bar we need to get kids to, and second is, are we getting all kids to it? I think in this country, some of our best are doing amazing work, but we have far too many students that are not even coming close to it. And we would also make the argument, as our name suggests, is we need to think about metrics of success that are focused on both education and the economy, or workforce readiness. And so for school districts that are still thinking that their goal is just to get all their kids to a high school diploma, we would say that that's too low of a bar. And so the notion that we see from the best systems in the world is that they're focused on setting kids up to thrive in school, in the workforce, and in their community. And so thinking about that, that means you need to be rethinking what are the skills, the competencies, and the learning environments that we're creating for our students. And probably the best example of that is, unless we help students understand what the possibilities are in their careers based on what their interests are, what their kind of what they do well, what motivates them. We have too many teachers that are still stuck with this notion of, when students ask, why am I learning whatever I'm learning? They say, because it's on the test. And until we can say to kids, we're teaching you the skills, the competencies, the academic underpinnings that'll help you thrive in whatever you do, that's the definition of success for us, is giving kids the opportunity and the exposure to imagine what they want to be, and then putting them on an educational trajectory to get there. And that's a challenge, but I also think it opens up a wide array of opportunities of how do we think about informal and formal learning, new partnerships, and strengthening the connection between our schools and our families.
And so, Richard, I will push just a little bit. A lot of times in education's initiatives come out, it seems like every other week, right? And then we're asked or tasked to adopt those initiatives. So let us know, how's the blueprint distinctive and differentiate itself from other educational reform initiatives?
So I'd say, Mark, the biggest difference is we are systems focused, right? If you read Ed Week, it's, this week it's problems with reading. So we're all going to be focused on the science of reading, or next week it's going to be about chronic absenteeism. So we're going to focus on that, or it's fill in the blank of what is the crisis of the day. And I think too often we think about education transformation as a checklist. We're going to do early education this year, and then we're going to do literacy next year, and then we're going to do teacher quality the year after that. And the hesitancy with it is, education is a very interconnected system. And so I think the distinction between us and the work we've done and learned from is that we focus on the system first, and then ask the question of, how do we align the education and workforce development system to the needs that are demanded in the workforce? And how do we create the learning opportunities for students to be able to excel in those, in that world? And so we don't discount that you need early education systems. That you need the science of reading embedded in. But if you don't kind of think about this as a system and create opportunities for educators to work together, we're going to overwhelm we are going to. We have already overwhelmed educators by layering things too high on a common plate and just saying, do one more thing. And so I'll give you one example, is the best performing systems in the world, their teachers probably spend anywhere from 5 to 8 hours a week less teaching students, and spend that time working with their colleagues, improving their practice, improving their support for students, addressing needs that may be found in one classroom and strengths in another for a student. But in a sense, they've created the notion of teaching as a team sport, rather than, a teacher walks into their classroom, shuts their door, and is solely responsible for their student success. The reality is that's not how the best systems work. And so we need to create opportunities to kind of change the conditions, change the system, change the instructional leadership focus so that we're creating opportunities for all educators to succeed and continue to learn. And in doing that, they create the environment for all students to succeed. So it's putting the pieces together in a systemic way so that we really can change the outcomes for all students.
So can you talk a little bit about what the key challenges to implementing the strategies are outlined in the blueprint? You've hit on a couple of them, of course, but can you go a little bit deeper on what those are?
Yeah, if you have about 2 or 3 days, I can knock out all the challenges, but let me just focus on two. So usually a key challenge that we find when we work with districts is the not envisioning or knowing the art of the possible. We recycle initiatives, mantras, kind of efforts without asking the question of how do systems do this better than us? How do we not just look at another district 2 towns over or 3 states over, but ask the question of where are the best systems in the world and what are they doing that is different than what we're doing to prepare our students better? And so that notion of the understanding the art of the possible is really powerful because then you can start to ask the question, all right, so there are systems in this world in very different countries that are getting their lowest performing students to perform at a very high level. They're getting it with all students getting to be a very high level. And they're putting these students into the workforce with the competencies, skills, certifications, and some experience doing internships, apprenticeships before they even leave schooling. So the art of the possible is really a powerful motivator because now you can ask the question is, where's the gap between what we're doing and what the best are doing? So that's one. The other one, Kathy, is I hate to say it, but we don't spend enough time thinking about how you lead change effectively. And we know a lot more about what works for kids and for education systems that never gets implemented. And I'll give you one prime example of this is in the science of reading, we actually have really strong evidence, probably the strongest area of anything that happens in education around how students learn to read, how to overcome the challenges in reading, and how to prepare all young people to be able to read to learn by 3rd grade. But it doesn't get implemented. Schools of education sometimes don't teach it or oftentimes don't teach it. There's curriculum that's sitting out there that's not aligned to the science of reading. And so part of that is because we do what we've always known. And so until we can get leaders that are starting to say, we need to focus on what works for young people and what works for one child may not work for another, but we know the different strategies that can work for all students. And so the question is how do we change systems, the readiness of teachers, the conditions in which educators work, the way we use time, how we allocate resources. All of these things are very difficult because there are stakeholders that are invested in the current system, but we know the current system is not working for enough students. And so the question is how do we strengthen our ability to lead change from the state house to the school board to the classroom? And I think that's the issue of how do we help people understand, the power of leading change and the skills that are necessary. And if we do that, I think this country is always up to the challenge, really transforming and creating the best of possibilities for all students.
So Richard, let me ask, particularly you said it a number of times, the importance of reaching all students. And too often there are some of our students that are marginalized, particularly those in underserved communities and those that may have some unique needs. How does the blueprint speak to those students in those populations?
So the question you're raising, Mark, is kind of the $64,000 question because we have, as a country, have not served kids that are coming from low-income backgrounds or maybe coming from diverse backgrounds, and very well. And the reality is that the workforce that traditionally has looked like me is retiring, and the workforce that is more diverse and representative of this country is got to be served better so that they can step into the jobs that are out there and that are needing to be filled. And so there's an urgency here to really address the education for all students. And because with our work, leadership is at the heart. Our biggest program that we run, the National Institute for School Leadership, it's the largest leader development program in the country. It's the most research that it was just put into the What Works Clearinghouse at the highest level, showing that it impacts student learning, teacher retention, school culture. And the research is really clear that schools do not turn around without effective leadership. So the idea of trying to bring in a program, that serves low-income students without changing systems or changing leadership is a missed opportunity. And so the work we do in changing systems and changing teachers' practice is anchored in creating the capacity of education leaders to understand how systems can transform to serve all students. And it really is supported with the research out there that says leadership is second to none in terms of necessary of improving schools and turning around the lowest performing schools. So it's that bet that we're making based on the evidence and the research we know and we've seen around the world, that by leaning into this notion of system transformation and having the leaders that can drive that change, we think, and we know from the work we do, is that the lowest performing students can excel as well as the highest performing.
We talk about that so much, about how important the educational leaders are to the success of our students. So thank you for hitting on that for sure.
So you talked about workforce and workforce readiness. So how does the blueprint encourage collaboration among schools, businesses, and local government?
So, it's interesting as we look at other countries that have excelled. Switzerland, Germany, kind of stand out in terms of the partnership between the business community and education. And, even Singapore now is leaning into it. Canada has strong connections. The biggest thing we see in that work is that the private sector, the employers, don't view their work with educators as goodwill. They view it as it's in their self-interest. And we talk about this as that they see an overlapping self-interest where employers are saying, if we engage with educators in terms of helping shape the skills and competencies we need, defining the certifications that are necessary to succeed in the workforce, then we're going to get the workforce we need. And when they start to open their doors to internships and apprenticeships, they're giving future employees, whether it's in their shop or somebody else's, opportunities to imagine and explore what's there. So the lessons we learn from other countries is that first and foremost, we need to make the argument that education is the pipeline for the future workforce. It's not to say that education is only to prepare people for the job, but we know that without the skills, without the certifications and credentials and degrees, young people won't be able to thrive in the workforce in their community or in their family. So we strongly engage our partners and help facilitate that partnership because we bring, again, the expertise around how do you build employer intermediaries? How do you create opportunities to help employers understand that this is not their moral imperative. This is about their economic imperative to have the future workforce. And typically what we will do is when we're working with school districts or states, we'll work with employers, kind of intermediaries, manufacturing associations, roundtables, chambers, and equally important with city government, state government, because there is a whole other side oftentimes that educators fail to understand in the policy world, which is the Department of Labor, whether at the national level or at the state level, has a Workforce Innovation Acts where they're trying to create opportunities and bridges to education and training. And so we do a lot of work in kind of bridging the sources of funding partnerships between employers, not just private sector, but public sector employers, and state and city local governments and educators, because we think that it's that combination, those kind of partnerships, that help kids get exposure to what the possibilities are, what their interests might drive them towards. And once they have that, kids are really powerful motivators once they have agency and ownership of why they're learning what they're learning. And so the more we can do greater exposure and greater career awareness in our middle schools and high schools, I think what you're going to start seeing is far more students leaning into kind of the why of school is answered for them, and then they crave the opportunity to have the trajectory to be successful. And it comes down to that simple notion is kids seem to kind of rise to or lower to the expectation we set for them. And if we set the bar high for them and provide all the supports in the world and give them a sense of it, they will work towards what they need to thrive. And that's the partnership we're striving for when we work with states or local school districts, school boards, is we bring together the necessary partners to really bring the blueprint to life.
Excellent. Excellent. Richard, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your insights on the NCEE blueprint. And to our members, this should solidify how important your leadership is.
Absolutely.
And how it is so impactful on our students and their success. So we thank you for joining us today. And if there's any way that our OSBA team can help you, please contact us. We are here as a resource to you. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for being here at the OSBA Forum.